The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Juniper Creek as Fiona Bennett stared at the telegram in her trembling hands. Ryder killed in Apache ambush. 3 months had passed since those devastating words had arrived, and still, she woke each morning expecting to find Ryan Marshall waiting on her porch with that crooked smile and those ocean-blue eyes that had captured her heart when she was just 18. Juniper Creek, Arizona Territory, 1878. The town had grown considerably in the 5 years since Fiona had arrived from Boston, following her father's appointment as the town doctor. What had once been little more than a way station for travelers heading west had blossomed into a proper settlement with a general store, a schoolhouse, and even a small hotel for passing stagecoach passengers. Fiona folded the telegram carefully and tucked it into the pocket of her simple calico dress. No amount of reading those words would change what they said. She stepped onto the boardwalk outside her father's medical office, where she worked as his assistant, and breathed in the warm desert air. The scent of dust and sage filled her lungs as she tried to push away the memory of Ryan's last words to her. "I'll come back for you, Fi. 3 weeks, and I'll be back with enough money to start our life together." That had been nearly 4 months ago. Ryan had taken a job as a dispatch rider, carrying important messages between Army outposts scattered across the territory. The pay was good, better than what he made working at the livery stable, but the routes were dangerous, cutting through lands where tensions with the Apache were high. "Miss Bennett," the voice of young Tommy Wilson broke through her thoughts as the 12-year-old boy came running down the street. "Miss Bennett, there's a rider coming in. Looks half dead in the saddle." Fiona's heart leapt, then immediately settled back into its familiar ache. How many times had she allowed herself to hope, only to be disappointed when the rider turned out to be a stranger or a traveling salesman? "Thank you, Tommy," she said, forcing a smile. "I'll tell Father to prepare for a patient." She turned to go back inside when Tommy grabbed her sleeve. "Miss Bennett, he's riding Scout." Ryan's Palomino gelding with the white blaze down his nose, the horse he'd been riding when he disappeared. Fiona gathered her skirts and ran toward the edge of town, her heart pounding in her chest like a wild thing desperate to escape. A crowd had already begun to gather as the rider approached, slumped forward in the saddle, his hat pulled low over his face. The horse moved slowly, each step seeming to require tremendous effort. As they drew closer, Fiona could see that the rider's clothes were tattered and stained with what looked like dried blood. His skin was deeply tanned and weathered from the elements, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. Scout came to a stop at the edge of the crowd, and the rider slowly raised his head. Beneath the grime and the beard, those ocean-blue eyes found hers immediately. "Ryan," Fiona whispered, afraid to believe what she was seeing. The man's cracked lips parted in what might have been a smile. "Hello, Fi." And then he slipped from the saddle, collapsing into the dust at her feet. The next few hours passed in a blur as Fiona and her father worked to tend to Ryan's injuries. His body bore the marks of severe hardship, a partially healed gunshot wound to his left shoulder, broken ribs that had mended improperly, deep cuts and bruises both old and new. He was dangerously thin, his once strong frame now gaunt and fragile. "He's lucky to be alive, Doctor," Bennett said as he finished cleaning and bandaging the worst of the wounds. "Whatever he's been through these past months, it's nothing short of a miracle that he made it back." Fiona sat by Ryan's bedside, watching the rise and fall of his chest as he slept, unwilling to look away for fear he might disappear again. She gently stroked his hand, tracing the new calluses and scars that hadn't been there before. Night had fallen when Ryan finally stirred, his eyes fluttering open and struggling to focus in the dim lamplight. "Am I dreaming?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "No," Fiona replied, fighting back tears. "You're home, you're safe." He tried to sit up but winced with pain and fell back against the pillows. "How long was I gone?" "Almost 4 months," she said, unable to keep her voice steady. The army sent word that you'd been killed in an Apache ambush, I thought. Her voice broke. I thought you were gone forever. Ryan's hand tightened around hers, his eyes never leaving her face. Not while you're still here, he said softly. I promised I'd come back to you, Fi. Death himself couldn't stop me from keeping that promise. Tears spilled freely down Fiona's cheeks now. What happened to you, Ryan? Where have you been all this time? He closed his eyes briefly as though gathering strength. It's a long story and not one for tonight, but I'll tell you everything, I promise. Just, not yet. Fiona nodded, recognizing the haunted look in his eyes. Whatever he'd endured, the wounds went deeper than flesh and bone. Rest, she said, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead. I'll be here when you wake. For the first time in months, Fiona slept without dreaming of loss. Instead, she dreamed of healing, of second chances, and of a future that had been returned to her against all odds. Ryan slept for nearly 2 days, waking only long enough to take sips of water or broth before drifting back into the deep sleep his body so desperately needed. Doctor Bennett assured Fiona this was normal. His body was healing, rebuilding its strength after months of deprivation and injury. On the morning of the 3rd day, Fiona entered the recovery room to find Ryan sitting up in bed, gazing out the window at the mountains in the distance. I thought I'd never see this view again, he said without turning. There were nights when I closed my eyes and tried to picture every detail of this town, of your face. Sometimes it was the only thing that kept me going. Fiona set down the tray of food she'd brought and moved to sit beside him on the edge of the bed. Are you ready to tell me what happened? Ryan nodded slowly. I think so, parts of it anyway. He took a deep breath. The telegram wasn't entirely wrong. There was an ambush. I was carrying dispatches from Fort Grant to Fort Thomas when a group of Apache warriors attacked. They killed the soldier riding with me and shot me in the shoulder. I managed to stay on scout and ride hard until we lost them, but I was losing blood fast. He paused, his hands clenching into fists on top of the blanket. I don't remember much after that. Scout must have kept going after I passed out. When I woke up, I was in an Apache camp. Fiona gasped. They took you prisoner? Not exactly. An old medicine man named Nako found me half dead by a creek. Instead of killing me, he brought me to his camp and healed my wounds. His granddaughter, Edzin, spoke some English. She told me that Nako had a vision that I was meant to live. Ryan's eyes took on a faraway look. I spent over 2 months with them, learning their ways, their language. They weren't the same Apache who had attacked me. They were a small band who wanted peace with the white settlers. Nako taught me how to survive in the desert, how to find water and food where it seemed there was none. Why didn't you try to come back sooner? Fiona asked, trying to understand. I tried, Fi. After the first month, when I was strong enough to ride, I set out for Juniper Creek. But there was a cavalry patrol that mistook me for a renegade. I was dressed in Apache clothing, my hair long, my beard wild. They shot at me, and I had to retreat back to the mountains. He looked down at his hands. After that, it wasn't safe to travel. The army was hunting Apache raiding parties, and both sides were killing first and asking questions later. Nako said I needed to wait for the right time. Then, 2 weeks ago, a group of soldiers attacked the camp. Ryan's voice grew tight with emotion. They killed many of the tribe, including Nako. In the chaos, Edzin told me to take scout and run to return to my people. She said her grandfather's final vision was that I would find my way home. Fiona reached out to take his hand, feeling the weight of his experiences in every word. I'm so sorry, Ryan. I rode for days, avoiding the main trails, moving only at night when I could. By the time I reached Juniper Creek, I was barely hanging on. He finally turned to look at her fully. But all I could think about was seeing your face again. Tears welled in Fiona's eyes. The whole time you were gone, people told me I needed to accept that you weren't coming back, that I needed to move on with my life, but I couldn't. Something inside me knew you were still out there. Ryan reached up to touch her cheek, his fingers gentle against her skin. Your faith brought me home, Fi. When everything else was lost, the thought of you was my North Star. Fiona leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. For the first time since receiving that telegram, she felt the knot in her chest begin to loosen. Ryan was alive. Wounded and changed by his experiences, but alive and here with her. "Frank Williams has been asking me to dinner for the past month," she said suddenly, opening her eyes to gauge his reaction. A flash of something jealousy, possessiveness, fear crossed Ryan's face before he carefully schooled his features. "Frank's a good man," he said, though his tone suggested he thought otherwise. Did you accept?" Fiona smiled, feeling a small surge of satisfaction at his obvious discomfort. "No, I told him my heart belonged to someone else, even if that someone might never return to claim it." Relief washed over Ryan's face, followed quickly by determination. "I'm claiming it now if you'll still have me. These months apart have shown me what truly matters in this life, Fi, and it's you, it's always been you." Before Fiona could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Her father entered, carrying his medical bag. "I need to examine our patient, doctor," Bennett said, his kind eyes taking in the scene before him. "If you don't mind giving us a few minutes, Fiona." She nodded and stood, but Ryan caught her hand before she could move away. "We'll finish this conversation later," he said, his eyes holding a promise that made her heart race. "Yes," she agreed. "We will." Over the next week, Ryan's strength returned gradually. He began taking short walks around the doctor's house, then ventured out onto the porch to sit in the sunshine. The townsfolk came by in a steady stream, eager to welcome back the man they had mourned as dead. Sheriff Jenkins listened intently to Ryan's account of his time with the Apache, particularly interested in his descriptions of troop movements and the locations of various bands. "The Army's been pushing hard against the Apache for months now," the sheriff explained. "General Crook is determined to force all the remaining bands onto the reservation at San Carlos, peaceful or not." Ryan frowned. "The people who saved me want peace, Sheriff. They're not raiders. They're just trying to live as they always have." "That may be so, son, but the government's made up its mind. It's reservation life or war for the Apache now." The sheriff adjusted his hat. "You might be called upon to give a formal statement to the Army about what you saw and where. They'll want to know the location of that band." "I won't help them hunt down the people who saved my life," Ryan said firmly. Sheriff Jenkins sighed. "I understand your feelings, Ryan, but refusing to cooperate with the Army could cause problems for you. There are already whispers about how you came back speaking Apache and wearing their clothes. Some folks are wondering where your loyalties lie." After the sheriff left, Ryan sat in troubled silence on the porch. Fiona brought him a cup of coffee and sat in the chair beside him. "What will you do?" she asked. Ryan stared out at the distant mountains. "I don't know, those people saved me, Fi. Nako treated me like a son. How can I betray them?" "You won't," she said confidently. "We'll find a way through this." He turned to look at her, his expression softening. "We?" "Yes, we." She reached for his hand. "Whatever you're facing, Ryan Marshall, you're not facing it alone anymore." A smile slowly spread across his face, the first genuine smile she'd seen since his return. "In that case, I believe we need to finish that conversation we started last week." Fiona felt her cheeks grow warm. "What conversation was that?" "The one where I was about to ask you to marry me before your father interrupted." Her heart skipped a beat. "Is that what you were going to ask?" Ryan set his coffee cup aside and took both her hands in his. "Fiona Bennett, these past months have taught me that life is too short and too precious to waste a single moment. I lost you once, and I'm not willing to risk losing you again. Will you be my wife?" Fiona didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I will." Ryan's face lit up with joy as he leaned forward to kiss her, a gentle press of lips that held the promise of a lifetime together. From the doorway, Dr. Bennett cleared his throat. "I see my patient is recovering nicely," he said dryly, though his eyes twinkled with approval. Ryan straightened, but kept hold of Fiona's hand. "Dr. Bennett, sir, I've just asked your daughter to marry me, and she's done me the great honor of accepting. I hope we have your blessing." The doctor studied them both for a moment before nodding. "You've always had my respect, Ryan, even before you showed the kind of courage and determination it took to find your way back to my daughter. You have my blessing and my heartfelt welcome to the family." Fiona rose to embrace her father, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "Thank you, Papa." As news of their engagement spread through Juniper Creek, the town seemed to rally around them. Mrs. Wilson from the general store brought over fabrics for Fiona to choose for her wedding dress. The pastor's wife delivered a handwritten book of her favorite recipes. Even Frank Williams, after an initial period of sulking, came by with a handcrafted rocking chair as an early wedding present. But not everyone was so welcoming. 2 weeks after Ryan's return, Fiona was sorting supplies in her father's office when she overheard a conversation between two men outside the window. "I'm telling you, Marshall's been compromised," one voice said. "No white man spends months with the Apache and comes back unchanged." "What are you suggesting, Parker?" The second voice belonged to Thomas Reed, owner of the town's only saloon. "I'm suggesting he might be more sympathetic to them than to us. Word is, he's refusing to tell the army where to find that band of Indians who supposedly saved him. For all we know, he could be feeding information back to them. That's a serious accusation. These are serious times. The Apache killed my brother last year. They've raided farms all around the territory, and now we've got a man in our midst who speaks their language and defends their ways. It ain't right. Ryan Marshall's always been a good man, honest as the day is long. People change, Tom, and not always for the better." The voices moved away, but the damage was done. Fiona stood frozen, supplies forgotten in her hands as fear gripped her heart. She knew the kind of danger such suspicions could create in a frontier town where memories of Apache raids were still fresh. That evening, she told Ryan what she'd overheard. "Parker's just talking," Ryan said, though she noticed how his jaw tightened. "He's always been quick to judge and slow to forgive. But what if he convinces others? What if the army decides you're withholding information?" Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair, which was now cut short again. "I've been thinking about that. I need to find a way to warn Edzin and her people without betraying them to the army. They need to know they should move further into the mountains, away from the established trails. How would you even find them? You can't go back out there alone, you're still recovering, and it's too dangerous." "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I have to try, Fi. I owe them my life." Before they could discuss it further, there was a sharp knock at the door. Dr. Bennett opened it to find Sheriff Jenkins standing on the porch, his expression grave. "Evening, Doc. I need to speak with Ryan." The sheriff stepped inside, nodding briefly to Fiona before turning his attention to Ryan. "There's a Lieutenant Colonel Barton in town with a detachment of cavalry. He's asking specifically for you, Ryan. Says he needs to debrief you about your time with the Apache." Ryan's face remained impassive, but Fiona could see the tension in his shoulders. "When?" "Now, he's waiting at my office." "I'll come with you," Fiona said quickly. Sheriff Jenkins shook his head. "Best if he comes alone, Miss Bennett. Military business." Ryan stood and reached for his hat. "It's all right, Fi. I'll be back soon." He kissed her cheek and whispered in her ear, "Don't worry. I know how to handle men like this." As Ryan followed the sheriff out into the gathering dusk, Fiona couldn't shake the feeling that their newfound happiness was balanced on the edge of a knife. Lieutenant Colonel Barton was a tall, imposing figure with a neatly trimmed mustache and cold, calculating eyes. He sat behind Sheriff Jenkins' desk as though it were his own, a map of the Arizona Territory spread out before him. "Mr. Marshall," he said, not bothering to stand when Ryan entered. "I understand you've had quite the adventure these past few months." Ryan removed his hat but remained standing. "You could call it that, sir. Sit down, Marshall. This may take some time." For the next 2 hours, Barton questioned Ryan relentlessly about his time with the Apache, their numbers, their weapons, the names of their leaders, and most importantly, the location of their camp. Ryan answered truthfully where he could, but was deliberately vague about details that might lead the army directly to Edzin and her people. "You seem reluctant to provide specific locations, Mr. Marshall," Barton said finally, leaning back in his chair. "I wonder why that might be." "I was injured for much of my time there, sir, feverish. My sense of direction was compromised. And yet you found your way back to Juniper Creek without difficulty." "I followed the stars and landmarks I recognized once I reached familiar territory." Barton studied him for a long moment. "Let me be clear, Marshal. The United States Army is engaged in a campaign to subdue hostile Apache and relocate all indigenous peoples to the San Carlos Reservation. This is not a request, it is government policy. If you are withholding information that could aid in this effort, you could be charged with obstruction or worse, collaboration with enemies of the United States." Ryan met the officer's gaze steadily. "I understand the policy, Colonel. I'm simply telling you what I know and don't know." "I think you know more than you're saying." Barton rolled up the map with deliberate slowness. "I'll be in town for 3 days. I suggest you use that time to refresh your memory. Otherwise, I may be forced to take you back to Fort Grant for a more thorough debriefing." The threat hung in the air between them as Ryan stood. "Is that all, sir?" "For now." Barton nodded toward the door. "You're free to go, Marshal, but remember what I said." Ryan walked back through the quiet streets of Juniper Creek, his mind racing. He had bought himself some time, but not much. Barton was not a man who made idle threats. When he reached the doctor's house, he found Fiona waiting anxiously on the porch. "What happened?" she asked as soon as he stepped into the lamplight. Ryan quickly recounted his conversation with Barton, watching as Fiona's expression grew increasingly worried. "He can't just take you away for questioning," she protested. "You haven't done anything wrong. In times like these, suspicion is often enough." Ryan took her hands in his. "I need to send a warning to Edzin and her people. They need to move deeper into the mountains before Barton finds them." "How? You can't go yourself. Barton would have you followed the moment you left town." Ryan was quiet for a moment, thinking. "There's a Pima trader named Joseph who comes through town every few weeks. He trades with both settlers and Apache. He might be willing to carry a message." "Is he trustworthy?" "As trustworthy as anyone in these times. He has no love for the army or their policies." Fiona squeezed his hands. "When is he due in town next?" "That's the problem. I don't know. It could be tomorrow or it could be a month from now." They sat in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Finally, Fiona spoke. "What if I took the message?" Ryan stared at her in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "Why not? No one would suspect me. I could say I'm gathering medicinal plants for Father. I know the area reasonably well from our picnics in the foothills." "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. If you were caught traveling to an Apache camp, Barton would arrest you as a collaborator. And that's assuming you could even find the camp, which is well hidden in rough country." "Then what do we do?" "We can't just sit here and wait for Barton to force the information out of you, or for him to find them on his own." Ryan ran a hand over his face, the exhaustion of the day catching up with him. "I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out, we have to." That night, Ryan slept fitfully, his dreams filled with images of Nako's camp in flames, of Edzin running from soldiers with fixed bayonets. He woke before dawn, a plan forming in his mind. He dressed quietly and wrote a quick note to Fiona, explaining that he needed to check on Scout at the livery stable and would return for breakfast. It wasn't entirely a lie. He did intend to check on his horse, but his true purpose was more urgent. The town was just beginning to stir as Ryan made his way to the small, run-down cabin at the edge of Juniper Creek, where Coyote Joe Miller lived. Joe was a grizzled old trapper who had been in the territory longer than anyone could remember. He traded with the Apache, the Pima, and anyone else who had furs or goods to barter. More importantly, he was one of the few white men respected by the indigenous peoples for his fair dealing and his knowledge of their customs. Ryan knocked softly on the weathered door. After a moment, it creaked open to reveal Joe's weathered face, his one good eye squinting suspiciously. "Marshall, thought you was dead." "Not quite, Joe. Can I come in? I need your help." Joe studied him for a moment, then stepped back, allowing Ryan to enter the sparse cabin. "Heard you spent time with the people," he said, using the term the Apache used for themselves. "I did. And now I need to get a message to them, urgently." Joe grunted, moving to stoke the small fire in his hearth. "Army in town, asking questions." "Yes, Lieutenant Colonel Barton." "He wants the location of the band that took me in. I've been vague, but he's not a patient man. I need to warn them to move deeper into the mountains." The old trapper poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs and handed one to Ryan. "Which band?" "Nako's people, though he's dead now." "His granddaughter Adzin would be leading them." Joe nodded slowly. "Know them. Good people. Nako was a wise man." He took a sip of his coffee. "Why should I help you?" "Because they saved my life, and now their lives are in danger, because you know it's the right thing to do." Joe studied Ryan over the rim of his mug. "Could be dangerous for all of us. I know, I wouldn't ask if there was any other way." After a long moment, Joe set down his mug. "I'm heading out to check my traps today. My route takes me near where they might be. I could deliver a message if I happen to cross their path." Relief washed over Ryan. "Thank you, Joe. I owe you. Write your message. I'll leave within the hour." Ryan quickly penned a note in the Apache language, warning Adzin of the army's presence and urging her to move her people to the hidden valley Nako had once shown him, a place the old medicine man had said was sacred and protected by the spirits. He signed it with the Apache name Nako had given him, Nahilii, the one who returns. As Joe tucked the message into his buckskin shirt, he fixed Ryan with a serious look. "This Barton, he's known for being thorough and merciless. Be careful, Marshall. I will, and Joe." "No one can know about this." The old trapper nodded once. "No one will." Ryan returned to the doctor's house just as Fiona was beginning to wonder about his absence. He couldn't tell her about his arrangement with Coyote Joe. The fewer people who knew, the safer everyone would be. Instead, he focused on preparing for his next encounter with Barton, which was sure to come soon. It came sooner than expected. That afternoon, as Ryan was helping Dr. Bennett organize his medical supplies, a young soldier appeared at the door. "Mr. Marshall." "Lieutenant Colonel Barton requests your presence at the hotel immediately." Ryan exchanged a look with Fiona, who had gone pale. "Of course, I'll come right away." "Ryan," Fiona began, but he cut her off with a gentle squeeze of her hand. "It's just another conversation, Fi. I'll be back for supper." But when Ryan arrived at the hotel, he found Barton in a state of barely contained rage. "You were seen leaving Coyote Joe Miller's cabin early this morning," Barton said without preamble. "A known trader with the Apache. Care to explain what business you had with him?" Ryan kept his face neutral. "Joe's an old friend. I wanted to hear his stories about the territory now that I've seen more of it myself." "And did Miller leave town shortly after your visit?" "I couldn't say. I didn't stay long." Barton slammed his fist on the table. "Don't play games with me, Marshall. Miller left town heading east into Apache territory. What message did you send with him?" "None, sir. As I said, we just talked." "I had men following you, Marshall. They saw you write something and give it to Miller." Ryan's stomach dropped, but he maintained his composure. "A list of supplies I need from his next trading run, nothing more." Barton's eyes narrowed. "I think you're lying. I think you sent a warning to your Apache friends. That would make you a traitor, Marshall." "I've broken no laws, Colonel." "Perhaps not explicitly, but I have the authority to detain anyone I consider a threat to military operations." Barton nodded to 2 soldiers standing by the door. "Mr. Marshall will be coming with us to Fort Grant for further questioning. Escort him to his residence to collect any personal items he needs, then bring him to the camp outside town. We leave at first light." Ryan's mind raced as the soldiers moved to flank him. "On what charges am I being detained?" "Suspicion of aiding hostile forces." "Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be, Marshall." Ryan considered his options. He could try to run, but that would only confirm Barton's suspicions and potentially put Fiona and the town in danger. Better to comply for now and look for an opportunity later. "May I at least say goodbye to my fiancé?" Barton hesitated, then nodded curtly. "You have 1 hour to collect your things and make your farewells. These men will remain with you the entire time." The walk back to the doctor's house felt like a death march. Ryan's mind whirled with possibilities, none of them good. If Barton took him to Fort Grant, there was no telling what methods he might use to extract information. And once he had what he wanted, Ryan might simply disappear, another casualty of the frontier conflicts. Fiona's face crumpled when she saw the soldiers flanking Ryan. "What's happening?" "Colonel Barton has ordered me to Fort Grant for further questioning," Ryan said carefully, aware of the soldiers' presence. "I'll be leaving in the morning." "No." Fiona moved toward him, but one of the soldiers stepped between them. "Madam, please stay back." Dr. Bennett emerged from his office, taking in the scene with a quick glance. "On what authority are you detaining this man?" he demanded. "Military authority, sir," the older of the two soldiers replied. "Lieutenant Colonel Barton's orders." "This is civilian territory, not a military installation," Dr. Bennett argued. "You have no jurisdiction here without the sheriff's approval." "The sheriff has been informed, sir," the soldier said stiffly. "Now, please step aside and allow Mr. Marshall to gather his belongings." Ryan moved past them into the small room he'd been using since his return. Fiona followed, the soldiers close behind. "You can't let them take you," she whispered urgently as Ryan began to collect his few possessions. "You know what will happen at Fort Grant." "I don't have a choice right now, Fi," he murmured back, "but I'm not giving up, trust me." He placed a few items of clothing into a small bag, along with the hunting knife Nako had given him, which he carefully wrapped in a shirt to conceal it from the watching soldiers. "Mr. Marshall, please say your goodbyes." "It's time to go," the older soldier said from the doorway. Ryan turned to Fiona, his heart breaking at the fear and desperation in her eyes. He took her hands in his, speaking loudly enough for the soldiers to hear. "It's going to be all right, Fi. I have nothing to hide. This is just a misunderstanding that will be cleared up quickly." Then, lowering his voice to a whisper only she could hear, he added, "If I'm not back in 3 days, go to Coyote Joe's cabin. Ask him about the Sacred Valley. He'll understand." Before she could respond, he kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and determination into that one gesture. When they parted, he saw the tears streaming down her face, but also the strength behind them. "I thought you were gone forever once before," she said, her voice breaking. "I won't lose you again." Ryan touched her cheek gently. "Not while you're still here," he promised. "I'll always find my way back to you, Fi. Always." The soldiers escorted Ryan to their camp at the edge of town, where Barton had established a temporary headquarters. He was placed under guard in a small tent with sentries posted outside. As night fell, Ryan lay on his bedroll, turning over every possible scenario in his mind. Escape seemed impossible. The camp was well organized, with regular patrols and alert sentries. Even if he managed to slip away, Barton would likely take his anger out on Juniper Creek, perhaps even on Fiona and her father. No, running wasn't the answer. His only hope was that Coyote Joe had successfully delivered his message to Edzin, and that she had moved her people to safety. If Barton couldn't find the Apache band, he would have no leverage to force Ryan's cooperation. As the camp settled into the quiet rhythms of night, Ryan closed his eyes and began to whisper the prayer Nako had taught him, a prayer for protection, for guidance, and for the wisdom to find a path through darkness. The sound of approaching hoofbeats jolted Ryan awake. It was still dark, but he could hear the commotion of men scrambling to attention. A moment later, the flap of his tent was thrown open and Barton stood there, fully dressed despite the early hour. "Get up, Marshall. We've had a change of plans." Ryan rose quickly, instantly alert. "What's happened?" "A patrol has spotted an Apache camp about 15 miles northeast of here. We're moving out immediately to investigate." Ryan's blood ran cold. It couldn't be Adzin's people. They would have received his warning by now and should be moving toward the sacred valley. Unless Joe hadn't found them in time. I thought we were heading to Fort Grant, Ryan said, playing for time as he pulled on his boots. That can wait. If this is the band you lived with, I want you there for identification. Barton's smile was cold. Consider it your opportunity to prove your loyalty. Within half an hour, the entire detachment was mounted and moving out. Ryan rode in the center of the column, flanked by 2 soldiers who made it clear he was still a prisoner. As the first light of dawn broke over the eastern mountains, Ryan strained his eyes, searching for any sign that might tell him which Apache band they were pursuing. They rode hard for several hours, following a trail that Ryan recognized was deliberately misleading, doubling back, crossing streams to hide tracks, splitting and rejoining. These were the tactics Nako had taught him, the ways of moving through the land without being followed. By mid-morning they reached a high ridge overlooking a small valley. Barton called a halt and moved forward with his scouts to survey the area. When he returned, his expression was grim. The camp is gone. They've scattered. He fixed Ryan with an accusatory stare. They were warned. Ryan kept his face carefully neutral. Or they simply moved on, as they often do. The Apache rarely stay in one place for long. My scouts found this. Barton held up a small leather pouch with distinctive beadwork. One of them said it appears to be a medicine bag, similar to what you were wearing when you returned to Juniper Creek. Ryan recognized it immediately as belonging to Nako, but he shrugged non-committally. Many Apache carry such pouches. You're lying, Marshal. This was the band you lived with, and somehow they knew we were coming. Barton stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. When we get to Fort Grant, you will tell me everything you know, and if you don't, I have ways of making even the most stubborn men talk. A commotion from the scouts positioned further down the ridge interrupted them. One of the men came running back, breathing hard. Colonel, we've spotted movement to the south, a small group moving fast. Could be part of the band that was here. Barton immediately ordered most of his men to mount up and follow. Marshal, you're coming with me, he said, grabbing Ryan's arm and pushing him toward the horses. Sergeant Miller, take 5 men and continue searching this area for any signs of where the main group might have gone. The rest of you with me. As they rode south at a breakneck pace, Ryan's mind worked furiously. He knew the territory well enough to guess that Barton was being led away from the true direction Adzin would have taken her people. This was almost certainly a diversion, a small group sacrificing themselves to draw attention away from the main band. After an hour of hard riding, they crested a hill to find themselves looking down at a box canyon. At its entrance stood 3 Apache warriors, mounted and waiting. When they saw the soldiers, they turned and rode into the canyon. It's a trap, Ryan said urgently. Colonel, they're drawing you in. The canyon walls are perfect for an ambush, Barton glared at him, or they're cornered and you're trying to help them escape. He turned to his men. Prepare to advance. Lieutenant Hayes, take a squad and circle around to see if there's another exit from that canyon. Colonel, listen to me, Ryan insisted. I've seen this tactic before. They want you to follow them in there. Silence, Barton snapped. One more word and I'll have you gagged. Ryan fell silent, watching helplessly as Barton ordered his men forward. The soldiers advanced cautiously toward the canyon entrance, rifles at the ready. The 3 Apache warriors had disappeared into the shadows of the narrow passage. Just as the first soldiers reached the mouth of the canyon, a volley of arrows rained down from the canyon walls, followed by the sharp crack of rifles. 2 soldiers fell immediately, and the rest scrambled for cover. Return fire, Barton shouted, drawing his own pistol. Chaos erupted as the soldiers fired blindly at the canyon walls, where Apache warriors had positioned themselves among the rocks. More arrows flew, finding targets with deadly accuracy. In the confusion, Ryan saw his chance. The 2 soldiers assigned to guard him had moved forward to join the fight, leaving him momentarily unattended. Without hesitation, He wheeled his horse around and galloped back the way they had come, bending low over the saddle to make himself a smaller target. He heard shouts behind him and the whistle of bullets, but he didn't slow down. He knew these lands now, knew how to disappear into them as Nako had taught him. His only thought was of getting back to Juniper Creek to Fiona before Barton could regroup and come after him. Ryan rode hard for hours, changing direction frequently and using every trick Nako had taught him to obscure his trail. He avoided the main paths, keeping to rocky ground where his horse would leave minimal tracks. When he came to streams, he rode in them for as long as possible before emerging in unexpected directions. By nightfall, he had put considerable distance between himself and Barton's men, but he knew he couldn't risk returning directly to Juniper Creek. Barton would surely send men there first. Instead, he made camp in a hidden gully, built a small, smokeless fire as Nako had shown him, and tried to formulate a plan. His situation was dire. He was now a fugitive, having escaped military custody. Barton would paint him as a traitor, possibly even claim he had led the soldiers into an Apache ambush. Returning to Juniper Creek would put everyone there at risk, especially Fiona and her father. But he had promised Fiona he would come back to her, and he intended to keep that promise. Somehow, he needed to get word to her, to arrange a meeting away from the town where they could plan their next move. As the stars emerged in the vast desert sky, Ryan remembered something Nako had told him during his time with the Apache. When the path ahead is hidden, look to the stars. They have guided travelers since the beginning of time. Ryan studied the constellations, finding the North Star that had guided him back to Juniper Creek. Tomorrow, he would make his way to the sacred valley where he hoped Zin and her people had found refuge. From there, he could send a message to Fiona through Coyote Joe, if the old trapper had also made it safely away from Barton's men. For now, though, he could only wait for dawn and pray that Fiona would understand the clue he had left her about the sacred valley. Back in Juniper Creek, Fiona paced anxiously in her father's study. It had been nearly 24 hours since Ryan had been taken away, and the town was buzzing with rumors. Some said he had been arrested for collaborating with the Apache. Others claimed he had led Colonel Barton's men into an ambush. No one seemed to know the truth, and Sheriff Jenkins had been frustratingly vague when she questioned him. "The Army handles its own affairs, Miss Bennett," he had said. "I suggest you wait for official word." But Fiona wasn't willing to wait. Ryan's whispered instructions echoed in her mind. "If I'm not back in 3 days, go to Coyote Joe's cabin. Ask him about the sacred valley." She had no intention of waiting 3 days, not when Ryan's life could be in danger. Decision made, she waited until her father was occupied with a patient, then slipped out the back door and made her way toward Coyote Joe's cabin at the edge of town. The old trapper's home appeared deserted when she arrived, the door securely locked, unusual for frontier dwellings, where doors were rarely secured. Fiona knocked several times with no response. She was about to leave when she noticed a small carving on the doorframe, a simple arrow pointing east. Acting on instinct, Fiona walked around to the east side of the cabin, where she found a small window partially hidden by overgrown brush. When she peered inside, she could see that the cabin was indeed empty, but something had been deliberately placed on the table directly in the window's line of sight, a folded piece of paper weighted down by a distinctive stone, painted with symbols she recognized as Apache. The window was latched from the inside, but the wood around it was old and weathered. Using a small pocket knife her father had given her for collecting plant specimens, Fiona managed to work the blade between the window and its frame, gradually loosening the latch until it gave way. The note was brief and written in a hand she didn't recognize. "The one who returns seeks the place where eagles nest above flowing waters. The medicine woman's daughter will guide the healer's daughter when the moon is full. Come alone to the split rock at the edge of Jenkins' property." Fiona read the note twice, committing it to memory before carefully placing it back exactly as she had found it. She closed the window as best she could and made her way back toward town, her mind racing. The one who returns had to be Ryan. The place where eagles nest above flowing waters must be the sacred valley he had mentioned. But who was the medicine woman's daughter? And the full moon was tonight. She would have only a few hours to prepare if she was to meet this mysterious guide at Split Rock. As Fiona approached her father's house, she saw a group of soldiers questioning him on the porch. She quickly ducked behind the Wilsons' barn, heart pounding, and listened. "I assure you, I have no idea where Ryan Marshall might be," her father was saying, his voice calm but firm. "He was in your custody, after all. He escaped during an Apache attack that killed 6 of our men," a harsh voice replied Colonel Barton, she assumed. "We have reason to believe he may try to contact your daughter. If that happens, you are to notify me immediately." "Harboring a fugitive is a serious offense, Doctor." "I understand the law, Colonel. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have patients to attend to." Fiona waited until the soldiers had moved on before slipping around to the back of the house. Her father was waiting for her, his expression grave. "You heard?" he asked quietly as she entered through the kitchen door. She nodded. "Ryan escaped. They're calling him a fugitive." "It's worse than that. Barton is claiming he led them into an ambush. He's accusing Ryan of treason, Fiona." The severity of the situation hit her like a physical blow. If Ryan was captured, he wouldn't face a simple questioning, he would likely be executed. She had to find him first. "Papa, I need to leave town tonight. Ryan left me a message about where to find him." Dr. Bennett's face paled. "Fiona, no, it's too dangerous. These men won't hesitate to arrest you too if they think you're helping Ryan." "I can't abandon him, Papa. I won't." She took her father's hands in hers. "You've always taught me to stand by those I love, to do what's right even when it's difficult. This is my chance to live by those principles." Dr. Bennett studied his daughter's face for a long moment before sighing deeply. "You are so like your mother, stubborn and brave to a fault." He squeezed her hands. "Tell me what you need and how I can help." As dusk approached, Fiona prepared for her journey. She dressed in her simplest, most practical clothes, a dark skirt and blouse that wouldn't draw attention, sturdy boots, and a wide-brimmed hat to shield her face. Her father provided a small pack with medical supplies, dried food, a canteen of water, and a small revolver he had kept hidden since their journey west from Boston. "I pray you won't need this," he said as he showed her how to load and fire it. "But the desert is no place for an unarmed traveler." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Fiona embraced her father one last time. "Tell anyone who asks that I've gone to visit Aunt Margaret in Tucson. That should give me a few days at least. Be careful, my darling girl, and bring both yourself and that young man of yours home safely." Fiona slipped out of town as the full moon rose, taking a circuitous route to avoid the army camp and any patrols. Split Rock was a local landmark about a mile outside of town, a massive boulder that had cracked down the middle, creating a narrow passage that local children used as a hiding place during their games. As she approached, Fiona saw no sign of anyone waiting. Had she misunderstood the message? Or was this another test to see if she had come alone as instructed? "Hello," she called softly, stepping into the shadow of the great rock. "I'm looking for the medicine woman's daughter." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, a figure seemed to materialize from the very shadow of the rock, a young Apache woman dressed in a mix of traditional clothing and items clearly traded from white settlers. She wore her hair in 2 long braids, and her dark eyes assessed Fiona with careful intelligence. "You are the healer's daughter?" the woman asked, her English accented but clear. "Yes, my father is the doctor in Juniper Creek. My name is Fiona." The woman nodded once. "I am Edzin, daughter of Nako's daughter. The one you call Ryan is my brother in all but blood. He saved my people from the Blue Coats. Now I will help him return to you." Fiona's heart leapt. "You've seen him? Is he safe?" "He reached the sacred valley before the soldiers could follow, but he cannot stay there. The Blue Coats search everywhere, and my people must keep moving to survive." Edzin gestured toward two horses tethered in the shadow of a nearby juniper tree. We must ride through the night if we are to reach him by morning. Fiona hesitated only briefly before nodding. Lead the way. They rode in silence for much of the night, Edzin setting a pace that was steady but not exhausting for the horses. She led them on a winding path through the desert, avoiding the main trails and keeping to areas where their tracks would be difficult to follow. As they rode, the landscape changed gradually from the familiar territory around Juniper Creek to more rugged, mountainous terrain. They ascended through narrow passes and along the edges of steep drop-offs, always climbing higher into the mountains. Near dawn, they paused to rest the horses at a small spring hidden among a cluster of boulders. As Fiona drank from her canteen, Edzin spoke. My grandfather saw something in Nahilai in Ryan when he found him near death by the creek. He said the spirits had guided this man to us for a purpose, that he would bridge the gap between our peoples. She gazed out at the lightening horizon. Nako believed that not all white men wished us harm, that some could understand our ways and help preserve them. He thought Ryan was such a man. He is, Fiona said with conviction. Ryan respects your people and your ways. That's why he refused to tell the army where to find you, even when it put him in danger. Edzin nodded. This is why I risk helping you now. Nako taught that a debt of life must be repaid, and Ryan is owed such a debt by my people. As the first rays of sunlight crested the eastern mountains, they resumed their journey, climbing even higher into terrain that seemed impassable to Fiona's untrained eye. Yet Edzin found paths where none appeared to exist, leading them through a maze of canyons and ridges until finally, they emerged onto a high plateau. Before them stretched a hidden valley, nestled among towering cliffs. A clear stream ran through its center, and stands of cottonwood and juniper provided sheltered areas throughout. In the distance, Fiona could see eagles soaring above the highest peaks, the eagle's nest above flowing waters from the message. The sacred valley, Edzin said simply. Few outside my people know of this place. It has sheltered us in times of trouble for many generations. They made their way down a steep switchback trail into the valley. As they neared the bottom, Fiona's heart began to race. Somewhere in this hidden paradise was Ryan, waiting for her. Edzin led her to a small clearing near the stream, where a simple lean-to had been constructed against the base of a massive cottonwood. As they dismounted, Fiona heard movement from within the shelter, and then Ryan emerged, squinting against the morning light. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, neither quite believing the other was truly there. Then Fiona was running, and Ryan was catching her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in an embrace so tight it nearly stole her breath. You came, he whispered against her hair. I wasn't sure if you'd understand the message. I would have searched every valley in Arizona to find you, she replied, drawing back just enough to see his face. He looked tired, and there was a new cut along his jawline, but his eyes were clear and determined. It's not safe for you to be here, Fi. Barton is calling me a traitor. Anyone helping me will be considered the same. I don't care. We'll figure this out together. She touched his face gently. I thought I lost you once before. I won't let it happen again. Ryan looked past her to Edzin, who had been watching their reunion with a small smile. Thank you for bringing her safely, he said in Apache. Edzin nodded. The council waits to speak with you both, she replied in English, glancing at Fiona. They will decide how to help you. Ryan took Fiona's hand, and together they followed Edzin deeper into the valley, where a small encampment had been established among the trees. About 20, Apache had gathered here, the remnants of Nako's band, Fiona guessed. They watched the newcomers with cautious but not unfriendly eyes. Near the center of the camp, a group of elders sat in a circle. Edzin led Ryan and Fiona to them, speaking rapidly in Apache. The eldest, a woman whose face was mapped with the lines of many years, gestured for them to sit. This is Nishti, Nako's sister, Ryan explained quietly to Fiona. She leads the council now. For the next hour they talked, with Ryan and Edzin translating for Fiona when necessary. Ryan explained their situation: his escape from Barton, the accusation of treason, and the likely consequences if they were captured. The elders listened gravely, occasionally asking questions or conferring among themselves in low voices. Finally, Nishti spoke at length, her gaze moving between Ryan and Fiona with penetrating intensity. When she finished, Ryan nodded respectfully. "What did she say?" Fiona asked. "She says that Nako's vision is coming to pass, that I am walking between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. She says that my path and yours are joined by forces stronger than either of us, and that to separate us now would be to go against the will of the spirits." Nishti spoke again, and this time Edzin translated. "My aunt says that you both must leave this territory. The Blue Coats will not stop hunting Nahilii, and they will use you, Healer's daughter, to draw him out. You must go far away to a place where the arm of the army cannot reach." "But where?" Fiona asked. "The army's influence extends throughout the territories." Nishti and the other elders conferred briefly before the old woman spoke again. "She suggests Mexico," Ryan translated. "There are places along the border where neither American nor Mexican authorities have much presence. Places where people can disappear and start new lives." Fiona considered this. Leaving everything behind: her father, her home, her plans for the future was a daunting prospect, but staying meant constant danger for both of them and for anyone who helped them. "What about your people?" she asked Edzin. "If Barton discovers you helped us." "We have survived worse," Edzin replied with quiet dignity. "And we will not be here when the Blue Coats come looking. There are other sacred places known only to us where we can seek refuge." Ryan took Fiona's hands in his. "This isn't what I wanted for us, Fi. I wanted to build a life with you in Juniper Creek, to give you the home and family you deserve." "Home isn't a place, Ryan. It's the people we love." She squeezed his hands. "You are my home now. Wherever we go, whatever we face, we'll face it together." The decision made, the council moved quickly to help prepare them for their journey. Maps were drawn showing hidden trails to the Mexican border, paths that avoided settlements and army patrols. Supplies were gathered: dried meat and fruits, medicinal herbs, extra ammunition for the revolver doctor. Bennett had given Fiona, as dusk approached, Edzin brought them fresh horses, sturdy Mustangs that could handle the rough terrain ahead. "These will carry you far," she said. "They know the desert and its ways." Ryan embraced her, speaking softly in Apache. Fiona understood enough now to catch the words for sister and gratitude. As they prepared to leave, Nishti approached them one last time. She placed her weathered hands on each of their heads in turn, speaking words that sounded like a blessing or a prayer. Then she removed a small leather pouch from around her neck, similar to the one Barton had found, but smaller, and pressed it into Ryan's hand. "Nako's medicine," Edzin explained. "To protect you on your journey, it contains his wisdom and his spirit." Ryan accepted it with reverence, slipping the cord over his head so the pouch rested against his heart. "We will honor his memory," he promised. With final farewells exchanged, Ryan and Fiona mounted their horses and rode out of the sacred valley as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. They would travel mainly at night, when the heat was less intense and the risk of being spotted was lower. As they made their way down from the high plateau, Fiona looked back at the hidden valley one last time. It seemed to shimmer in the fading light, almost as if it were already becoming a memory, a dream of safety in a dangerous world. "We'll be all right," Ryan said, noting her backward glance. "Nako used to say that every ending is also a beginning. This is our beginning, Fi." She turned to him, finding strength in his steady presence beside her. "Then let's make it a good one." They rode south through the night, guided by stars and by the detailed map Edzin had drawn for them. The terrain was challenging: steep descents, narrow passages between towering rock formations, dry washes that could become death traps if sudden rains came, but their horses proved as sure-footed as promised. By dawn, they had covered nearly 20 miles, putting significant distance between themselves and any pursuers. They made camp in a small cave high on a mountainside where they could see for miles in every direction. As they shared a simple breakfast of dried meat and berries, Fiona asked the question that had been on her mind since their decision to flee. "What will we do when we reach Mexico? How will we live?" Ryan considered this. "I learned many skills during my time with Naco's people hunting, tracking, finding water in the desert. And before that, I worked with horses most of my life. There are ranches in northern Mexico that might value such skills. And I have my medical training," Fiona added. "Not as extensive as Father's, but enough to be useful in places where doctors are scarce. We'll find our way," Ryan said with conviction. "Together." They rested through the heat of the day, taking turns keeping watch. No sign of pursuit appeared on the horizon, but they remained vigilant. Barton was not a man who would give up easily, especially after losing men in the Apache ambush. As dusk approached, they prepared to continue their journey. Ryan studied the map by the last light of day, tracing their planned route with his finger. "If we maintain this pace, we should reach the border in 3 more nights," he said. "There's a small village here, just on the Mexican side, where Adzin says we might find temporary shelter with people who trade with the Apache." Fiona nodded, adjusting the pack on her horse. "And from there, we'll have choices to make. We could head further south, perhaps to Sonora, or west toward the Gulf of California. Wherever we go, we'll go as husband and wife." He reached for her hand. "That is, if you'll still have me, now that I'm a fugitive with nothing to offer but an uncertain future." Fiona laced her fingers through his. "I fell in love with a man, not a future. That man is standing before me now, unchanged in all the ways that matter." Ryan drew her close, kissing her with a tenderness that belied the urgency of their situation. When they parted, he pressed his forehead to hers. "When we find a safe place, a priest or magistrate to marry us properly, I promise you a real wedding. Not the one we planned in Juniper Creek, but one that marks the beginning of our life together, whatever form that life takes." "I'll hold you to that promise," she said, smiling up at him. They mounted their horses as the first stars appeared, continuing their journey south through terrain that grew increasingly arid. The next 2 days followed a similar pattern, riding by night, resting during the day in whatever shelter they could find, always watching for signs of pursuit. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, as they rested in the shade of a rocky overhang, Ryan suddenly tensed. He motioned for Fiona to stay silent, then moved cautiously to the edge of their shelter, peering out at the desert below. "Riders," he whispered when he returned to her side. 6 of them, moving fast from the north. Fiona's heart raced. "Barton?" "I think so. They're following our trail." Ryan quickly began gathering their belongings. "We need to move now, try to reach the border before they catch up." They mounted and rode out, abandoning the careful path they had been following in favor of speed. The border was less than 15 miles away. They might make it before nightfall if they pushed their horses hard. But the desert had other plans. As they crossed a wide, open plain, dark clouds gathered with surprising speed over the mountains to the west. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. "A summer storm," Ryan said grimly. "If it catches us out here, the washes will flood. We need to find high ground." They altered their course, heading for a rocky ridge that rose from the desert floor about 2 miles ahead. Behind them, the riders had appeared on the horizon, tiny figures in the distance, but moving steadily closer. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall as they reached the base of the ridge. Lightning split the sky, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Their horses, sensing the danger, needed little urging to climb the steep slope toward safer ground. "There." Fiona pointed to a dark opening in the rocks about halfway up the ridge. "A cave or an overhang we can shelter there." They had just reached the entrance, a shallow cave that extended about 20 feet into the ridge when the heavens opened. Rain fell in blinding sheets, transforming the desert in minutes. Dry washes became raging torrents, and the plain they had just crossed began to disappear under a spreading sheet of water. "They'll have to seek shelter too," Ryan said, watching as the distant riders changed direction, heading for another area of high ground about a mile away. "This might buy us some time." The storm raged for hours, the most violent summer thunderstorm either of them had ever witnessed. Night fell, turning the world outside their shelter into a chaos of darkness and water, illuminated periodically by brilliant flashes of lightning. They made a small, sheltered fire deeper in the cave, careful to keep it small enough that its light wouldn't be visible from outside. As they huddled together for warmth, sharing the last of their dried meat, Fiona found herself strangely calm despite their precarious situation. "I keep thinking about something my mother used to say before she died," she said softly. "She told me that life rarely gives us what we expect, but it always gives us what we need if we're brave enough to accept it." Ryan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her closer. "And what do you think we need right now?" "Faith," she replied simply. "Faith in each other, in our decision, in whatever future awaits us across that border." He was quiet for a moment, then reached inside his shirt to pull out the medicine pouch Nishti had given him. "Nako would agree with your mother. He believed that the path set before us is never random, that every challenge serves a purpose in shaping who we become." "And who are we becoming, do you think?" Ryan considered this. "People who understand both worlds, perhaps. People who can bridge the gap between different ways of living, of seeing. I think that's what Nako saw in me and what he would see in us together." The storm began to ease around midnight, the thunder growing more distant, the rain softening to a gentle patter. They took turns sleeping, always keeping one person on watch at the cave entrance. Dawn broke clear and brilliant, revealing a transformed landscape below. The desert bloomed with temporary life, water still standing in wide pools across the plain. In the distance, they could see no sign of the riders who had been pursuing them. "The storm may have washed away our tracks," Ryan said hopefully as they prepared to move on, "and the ground will be too wet for them to pick up our trail easily." They descended carefully from their rocky shelter, finding the desert floor muddy but passable. Their horses, refreshed from the night's rest, moved with renewed energy. By mid-morning they had covered several miles and the border was now tantalizingly close. The terrain had changed, subtly fewer cacti, more mesquite and acacia, and in the distance, the smudge of green that suggested a settlement. "That must be the village Adzin mentioned," Ryan said, pointing. "San Miguel, just across the border." Fiona felt a surge of hope. "How much farther?" 5 miles, maybe 6. We could be there by early afternoon." They pushed on, the sun climbing higher in the sky, drying the desert around them with astonishing speed. The mud of morning became dust by noon, and the pools of water shrank visibly with each passing hour. They were less than 3 miles from the border when Ryan, glancing back, spotted a dust cloud on the horizon. "Riders," he said tersely. "Moving fast." Fiona didn't need to ask who it was. "Can we outrun them?" "Not on these horses, not after the pace we've been keeping." Ryan scanned the terrain ahead, looking for options. "There's a ravine about a mile ahead. If we can reach it, we might be able to lose them in the maze of smaller canyons." They urged their tired horses to a faster pace, making for the dark line that marked the beginning of the ravine. Behind them, the dust cloud grew larger, the riders now clearly visible 6 men on horseback, riding hard. "Barton," Ryan confirmed grimly as they reached the edge of the ravine. "And he's not giving up." They plunged into the ravine, following its twisting course as it deepened and narrowed. The walls rose around them, offering both protection and the threat of being trapped. They turned down a side canyon, then another, trying to create a confusing trail that would slow their pursuers. But the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the canyon network, sometimes seeming to come from all directions at once. Barton and his men had split up, covering multiple routes through the maze. "This isn't working," Ryan said as they paused at a junction of 3 smaller canyons. They know these lands too well. Fiona's mind raced. What if we split up? You take one path, I take another, then reunite at the border. Ryan was already shaking his head. No, I won't risk you being caught alone. But they're after you, not me. If they follow you, I can make it to San Miguel and find help. It's too dangerous, Fi. We stay together. Before they could argue further, a shot rang out, the bullet striking the canyon wall just above their heads. They looked up to see a soldier positioned on the rim of the ravine, already taking aim for a second shot. Go, Ryan shouted, spurring his horse down the rightmost canyon. Fiona followed, ducking low as another shot echoed behind them. The canyon twisted and turned, gradually widening as it descended toward the desert floor. They could hear shouting and the thunder of hooves as their pursuers converged, no longer needing to search multiple paths. They emerged from the canyon onto a flat expanse of desert, the border now visible as a subtle change in the landscape less than a mile ahead. On the Mexican side, the village of San Miguel sprawled along a small river, its adobe buildings glowing golden in the afternoon sun. We can make it, Fiona said, hope surging within her. But as they urged their exhausted horses forward, more riders appeared from a parallel canyon to their right. Barton himself and two soldiers, cutting diagonally across their path toward the border. They're trying to get ahead of us, Ryan said. To cut us off before we cross. It would be close. Their horses, despite their weariness, responded to the urgency in their riders' commands, finding a last reserve of strength. The gap between the two groups narrowed as they raced toward the invisible line that marked the boundary between nations. Behind them, the rest of Barton's men had emerged from the canyon and were giving chase, firing occasional shots that fell well short of their targets, but served as a warning of what awaited if they were caught. 50 yards from the border, Barton and his men were positioned directly in their path, spread out in a line with rifles raised. Halt in the name of the United States Army, Barton's voice carried across the desert. Ryan reined his horse to a stop, Fiona following suit beside him. They were so close the border lay just beyond Barton's line, tantalizingly near yet impossibly far. It's over, Marshal, Barton called. Surrender now and I'll guarantee Miss Bennett's safety. Resist, and I can't promise what might happen in the confusion of an arrest. Ryan's jaw tightened as he assessed their options. The three men before them were spread out about 10 yards apart, creating a barrier across their path. Behind them, the other soldiers were closing in, cutting off any retreat. What do we do? Fiona whispered, fighting to keep panic from her voice. Ryan's eyes never left Barton as he replied quietly, when I give the signal, ride hard to the right between those two soldiers. Don't stop for anything until you're across the border. I won't leave you. You won't be, trust me, Fi. Before she could argue further, Ryan called out to Barton. I want your word that Miss Bennett will be allowed to return to Juniper Creek unharmed. You have it, Barton replied. Now dismount and approach with your hands up. Ryan nodded as though in agreement. Then, in a move so swift it caught everyone by surprise, he drew the revolver from his waistband and fired 2 rapid shots into the air. Now, he shouted to Fiona, spurring his own horse directly toward Barton. The colonel and his men, momentarily startled by the shots, were slow to react. Fiona galloped toward the gap between 2 soldiers who scrambled to intercept her. But her horse, sensing freedom ahead, thundered past them before they could adjust their positions. Ryan, meanwhile, had created the perfect diversion. His charge toward Barton forced the colonel to focus on him, leaving the way clear for Fiona. As Barton raised his rifle, Ryan veered sharply to the left, then cut back toward the gap Fiona had just passed through. Shots rang out behind them as they raced the final yards to the border. Fiona felt something tug at her sleeve, a bullet passing close enough to tear the fabric but missing her arm. Then they were across, leaving American soil behind and entering Mexico. They didn't slow down until they had reached the outskirts of San Miguel, where they finally reined in their exhausted horses. Looking back, They could see Barton and his men gathered at the border, unable to follow without creating an international incident. "We made it," Fiona breathed, hardly daring to believe it. "We're safe." Ryan reached across the space between them to take her hand. For now, Barton won't give up easily, but he'll have to work through official channels now, which buys us time to move deeper into Mexico. They rode into San Miguel as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. The village was small but bustling, with a central plaza surrounded by adobe buildings. People paused in their activities to watch the dusty, exhausted strangers ride in, but there was more curiosity than hostility in their gazes. Ryan's limited Spanish, learned from vaqueros he had worked with in his youth, was enough to secure them a room at the village's small inn and stabling for their horses. The innkeeper, a middle-aged woman named Señora Ramirez, seemed to understand their situation without being told. "Many come across the border looking for a new beginning," she said in careful English as she showed them to a simple but clean room. "San Miguel has a tradition of hospitality to such travelers." That evening, as they sat in the inn's small dining room sharing a meal of beans, tortillas, and spiced meat, Ryan and Fiona began to plan their next steps. "We should move on within a day or two," Ryan said. "Barton will likely send word to Mexican authorities requesting our arrest and extradition." "Where will we go?" Fiona asked. "South, I think." Señora Ramirez mentioned a coastal town called Puerto Esperanza, about 100 miles from here. "It's small, isolated, but with enough trade to offer opportunities for work. And far enough from the border to be safe," Fiona added. Ryan nodded. "We'll need supplies for the journey, and—" He hesitated, then reached across the table to take her hand. "There's something else I want to do before we leave San Miguel." "What's that?" "Marry you, properly, legally. There's a small church in the plaza and a priest who might be willing to perform the ceremony." Fiona's heart swelled with emotion. "Yes," she said simply, "I'd like that very much." The next morning, Ryan sought out the parish priest, a kindly older man named Padre Miguel, who agreed to marry them that afternoon. Señora Ramirez, hearing of their plans, insisted on helping Fiona prepare, lending her a beautiful white blouse embroidered with colorful flowers to wear with her own dark blue skirt. "It was my daughter's wedding blouse," the innkeeper explained as she helped Fiona arrange her hair. "She lives in Hermosillo now with her husband and children. It would please me to see it worn for such a happy occasion." As the afternoon sun bathed the village in golden light, Ryan and Fiona stood before Padre Miguel in the simple stone church. Their witnesses were Señora Ramirez and her brother, who owned the village's small general store. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, conducted in a mixture of Spanish and English to accommodate all present. When Padre Miguel pronounced them husband and wife, Ryan took Fiona's face gently between his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. "My wife," he whispered against her lips. "My husband," she replied, the words carrying the weight of all they had endured to reach this moment. They spent 2 more days in San Miguel, gathering supplies for their journey south and enjoying the brief respite from danger. On the morning of the 3rd day, they prepared to depart, their horses rested and their packs filled with provisions provided by the generous villagers. As they were saying their farewells in the plaza, a rider galloped into the village from the north, pulling his lathered horse to a stop near the well. It was Coyote Joe Miller, dusty and trail-worn but unmistakable with his weathered face and patched buckskin jacket. "Joe," Ryan exclaimed, approaching the old trapper cautiously. "What are you doing here?" Miller dismounted stiffly, eyeing Ryan and Fiona with evident relief. "Looking for you too, been tracking you since Juniper Creek." "Are you alone?" Fiona asked, glancing nervously toward the northern road. "Yep." "No army on my tail, if that's what you're asking." Joe accepted a dipper of water from a village woman with a nod of thanks. "Got a message for you from your pa, Miss Fiona, or should I say Mrs. Marshall now?" Fiona's heart leapt. "You've spoken with my father. Is he all right?" "He's fine." Worried about you, naturally. Joe reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded letter. He asked me to deliver this and to tell you that Barton and his men have been recalled to Fort Grant. Seems the colonel overstepped his authority in pursuing you across the border. Caused quite the diplomatic fuss. Fiona took the letter with trembling hands, breaking the seal to read her father's familiar handwriting. My dearest Fiona, I pray this letter finds you and Ryan safe and well. I want you to know that the situation here has changed considerably since your departure. Colonel Barton's unauthorized incursion into Mexican territory has been formally reprimanded by his superiors, and he has been reassigned to a desk position at Fort Leavenworth, far from the Arizona territory. Moreover, several of Barton's own men have come forward with testimony contradicting his account of the ambush. It seems your Ryan did not lead them into a trap, but in fact tried to warn them against entering the canyon. The military investigation is ongoing, but the charges of treason have been suspended pending its completion. What this means, my darling girl, is that while Ryan might face some lesser charges should he return to U.S. territory, his life would no longer be in danger. You both have choices now that were not available to you before. Whatever you decide whether to return or to build a new life where you know that you have my blessing and my love. Mr. Miller has agreed to wait in San Miguel for 3 days to carry your reply. With all my love, your father. Fiona read the letter twice, then handed it to Ryan, watching his face as he absorbed its contents. We could go back, she said quietly when he had finished reading. Clear your name completely. Ryan folded the letter carefully, his expression thoughtful. We could, but would we want to? Juniper Creek holds memories for both of us, good ones, but also pain and danger. And even if the most serious charges are dropped, there would always be those who believed Barton's version of events. Fiona thought of the life they had been planning before Ryan's disappearance, the small house near her father's practice, the children they had hoped for, the familiar rhythms of a town she had come to love. It would be safe, predictable, comfortable. Then she thought of the past week, the dangers they had faced together, the strength they had found in each other, the bond forged through adversity. And she thought of the unknown possibilities that lay ahead in this new land, where they could define themselves not by the expectations of others, but by their own choices. What do you want, Ryan? She asked. Truly. He looked past her to the southern road that would lead them to Puerto Esperanza and beyond. I want what I've always wanted, a life with you, but I've changed, Fi. My time with Nako's people, the months believing I might never see you again, these past days on the run, they've all shaped me into someone different from the stable hand who left Juniper Creek 4 months ago. I've changed too, she admitted. I'm not the same doctor's daughter who waited patiently for you to return. I'm stronger now, more certain of what matters. Ryan's gaze returned to her face, searching. And what matters to you, Fiona Marshall? She smiled at the sound of her new name. You, us. The chance to build something that's truly ours on our own terms. She gestured toward the southern road. I want to see Puerto Esperanza. I want to find out what kind of life we might create there, and if it doesn't suit us, we'll move on until we find a place that does. Relief and joy spread across Ryan's face. Are you sure? Your father will understand, and we can write to him, visit perhaps when enough time has passed to ensure your safety. She took his hands in hers. This is our beginning, remember? Let's make it count. Ryan pulled her into his arms, holding her close as though she were the most precious thing in the world. I love you, Fiona Marshall, more than I have words to express. Show me then, she whispered against his chest. Show me every day of our new life together. They composed a reply to Dr. Bennett, expressing their love and gratitude while explaining their decision to continue south. Joe promised to deliver it safely, along with a small package containing a lock of Fiona's hair and her mother's locket keepsakes to comfort her father until they might meet again. As the sun reached its zenith, Ryan and Fiona Marshall mounted their horses and turned south, leaving San Miguel behind. Before them stretched an unknown future, full of possibilities and challenges they would face together. "Not while you're still here," Ryan had promised when Fiona feared she had lost him forever. Now, as they rode side by side toward their new beginning, those words took on a deeper meaning, a promise not just of his return, but of a lifetime spent ensuring that neither would ever truly be lost again. The coastal town of Puerto Esperanza welcomed them with open arms. Nestled between mountains and sea, it was a place of breathtaking beauty and unexpected opportunities. Ryan's skills with horses found immediate value on a nearby rancho, while Fiona's medical knowledge filled a critical need in a community with no doctor of its own. Within a year, they had built a small but comfortable home on a bluff overlooking the Pacific. Their days were filled with work, their evenings with each other, and their hearts with a contentment neither had thought possible during those dark days of separation. And when, 2 years after their arrival, Fiona gave birth to twins, a boy they named David after her father, and a girl they called Esperanza after the town that had become their haven, Ryan held his children in arms that had once carried the burden of survival and now cradled new life. "This," he whispered to Fiona as she rested in their bed, watching him with their newborns, "this is what Nako meant when he spoke of paths and purposes. Everything we endured led us here to them, to this moment." Fiona reached out to touch the medicine pouch that still hung around Ryan's neck. "Then we honor him by living fully, by teaching our children to walk in both worlds with respect and understanding. And by remembering," Ryan added, "that love is the most powerful medicine of all, strong enough to bring a man back from the edge of death, to guide him across deserts and mountains, to help him find his way home when all seems lost." "Not while you're still here," Fiona echoed his words from what seemed a lifetime ago, but was in truth the beginning of the life they now shared. Ryan leaned down to kiss her, their children nestled between them, living proof that even in the wildest, most dangerous places, love could not only survive but flourish. And in the years that followed, as their family grew and their roots in Puerto Esperanza deepened, they never forgot the journey that had brought them there, a journey that began with loss and separation, but ended with the most precious finding of all: each other.